Okay, so this is going to be like an imaginary conversation I have with myself as a psychiatrist and a patient. I am too lazy and busy, really, to. I'm doing university again, but I'm too bogged for time to do the whole split screen thing and like put on different clothes for a two-sided conversation with myself. So the psychiatrist will just be the kippa, and I'll just face left and face right, or the opposite. Yeah. Anyway, so I prayed to God. Uh, I'm really praying hard that He will protect me from the marijuana, that He'll prevent it from being federally legalized and reverse the decriminalization policies and push recriminalization and things like that. That way, this harm that's impacting me directly and indirectly will stop and be reduced, and therefore it'll reduce the suffering and pain caused by marijuana, etc., including hemp. Huh, interesting. So you're telling me you're praying to the same God that caused your pain and suffering to stop your pain and suffering. Well, yeah, you see, I can't really count on people. I can't count on manna. There's no secular solution to this problem because even most all secularists that I'm aware of are not really integrated into a cold scientific reality. They're very emotionally and politically, manipulated and manipulative and deceptive, etc. So there's not a lot of secularists who are anti-marijuana, despite the science proving all the harms of marijuana. And on top of that, I clearly cannot rely on government, family, society, corporations, or any human organizations or individuals to do anything about this problem. I've tried that for years. My only hope is I cannot rely on people, so I have to rely on God. The same God who created marijuana, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and so forth, and all these other drugs is the God you're praying to save you from the drugs, essentially. Well, yeah, when you put it that way, it doesn't make any sense. I just I don't have any hope for the future, and I'm trying to not be suicidal right now because secondhand marijuana makes me suicidal, and it's increasing in the environment because these horrifically evil people are pushing it, and unfortunately, our government is not stopping them. It's just nobody's stopping them. The drug dealers have taken over the government, essentially. Yeah. Interesting. So, I watch this too much. So you're telling me that the very same God who created man to be sinful and corrupt and created evil and pain and suffering and created you just to live a horrible life full of pain and suffering is the only one you can rely on to save you from his creation and himself. I think a lot of Christians would claim that God doesn't create any of the bad stuff, that God's only the good stuff, and the bad stuff is somehow Satan. Right? Yeah, that really confused me too, because that makes zero sense. I mean, this implies there is a second creator who creates creation within God's creation. So there's like a creator outside of God's creation, so God didn't create everything. But even beyond that, it's in the Jewish holy books that the Christians steal Like Isaiah 45:7 says, I create, the light and the darkness, therefore God creates pleasure and pain, right? Happiness and sorrow. All the different translations have this, duality of God creates the good and the bad. So it doesn't make any sense that God would be only the good stuff. God is clearly either non-existent, or even worse, he does exist and allows this to happen because he is a sadist. And being a sadist, he loves our suffering. And that's why he makes us suffer. It's easier for me to think that God doesn't exist than to think that God does exist and allows this stuff to happen, let alone to get this bad. And it's going to get worse. It's been getting worse. And there's been no divine intervention. And yet you still pray. So, do you have a good track record of God answering these prayers by, helping you to fight marijuana legalization, by preventing marijuana legalization? Does he punish the wicked and reward the righteous by, divine intervention, killing marijuana growers and dealers and distributors and cannabis industry representatives and corrupt politicians who are sold out to these industries and so forth and so on? Has God once actually helped you in this respect? No. And I have been praying for years about this very specific thing and altering my behavior to satisfy God in the hopes that my righteous conduct would perhaps, sway his decision to help me and change his lack of intervention thus far. It hasn't. You got me there. That's a pretty solid point. Right, yeah, and so despite all these years of prayer and good conduct, things have only been getting worse. Do you still think that there is a direct cause and effect relationship between, bad things happening in your life and your conduct? Given that you very specifically said you've turned your life around and you've changed your life to not, sin and do your best to do the right things, but your suffering hasn't decreased. If anything, it's increasing because of marijuana, right? Yeah, no, that's a pretty strong point, but I also think that Christians are really, really terrible in this whole concept of you should only be good for reward's sake, right? Lack of punishment is a reward in itself, so... So it doesn't make any sense that God would need us to be motivated by reward and punishment, and we should just be good for its own sake. It's just the right thing to do, not because we're going to be punished if we don't and rewarded if we do. That makes a lot of sense, but even further beyond that, why would God allow this to happen to people who are good? And this is a common question throughout the history of religion. Why do the righteous suffer? And the obvious explanation is there is no God. There is no divine intervention to protect the righteous from the wicked. And government technically was supposed to be that sort of intervention, but clearly it has also been corrupted by greed and, etc. It's very interesting to me because you seem very rational about this, very grounded in reality, but it seems like there is no effective solution. It honestly seems like suicide might be the best decision, or the best solution, I should say, because clearly none of these people care. Your neighbors who smoke marijuana don't care, or hemp, etc. Which is weird in itself because they claim it's not addictive, but they just can't live without it. I mean, if something isn't addictive and there is a punishment of prison time if you do it, you should just be able to quit to avoid the risk of prison time and arrest and things like that. Clearly they're lying, and it's very addictive. And Hollywood and other media outlets have been lying about this very thing, along with pushing it on the masses through product placement in their media. So the question then doesn't become what kind of God would allow that, but what kind of government allowed that. Yeah, it seems like there. I don't have an answer for you. I mean, even from a secularist perspective, it does seem like suicide is the best alternative to living psychotic, because even though you're not suicidal, you clearly become suicidal with secondhand cannabis exposure. And the government knows about this connection. They've known about it for at least a century. And they just don't give a shit. They only care about money. Good luck.